In this video, I am going to show you absolutely everything you need to know to install a traditional wired alarm system in a new construction home. Let's get to it.
I really hope this video helps you figure out your home security system. If it does, would you mind helping me by clicking that subscribe button? I appreciate you.
Most alarm systems sold today are wireless, meaning they use RF transmitters to talk between the sensors on your windows and doors and the alarm panel. Now those are wonderful for retrofitting houses that are already built. However, I find that there's some downsides to wireless alarm systems. And the biggest of those is the fact that you have to put batteries in the sensors. And so those batteries of course have to be replaced, and it's just a maintenance item that can get very, very annoying. The other problem I have with wireless alarm systems is just that in my experience they tend to have more errors and more issues and things that need repaired and things like that. Things can block transmission of the signal. Sometimes those little sensors just go bad. Sometimes they say that there's a low battery when there's not. Things like that. And so if you're building a house and you're at the point of framing, where it's in framing, I highly recommend using a wired alarm system. And a wired alarm system is basically the traditional alarm system that everybody had up until probably about 10 years or so ago. And so I know they're way more reliable. There's no batteries to change. For example, my parents had one installed in the year 1990, and it really didn't have any issues whatsoever for 20 plus years until they sold that house. And so I really like a wired alarm system and prefer one if you're building a new house. Now, they're not actually that complicated to install, and I think that anybody can do it, particularly with the help of this video. Probably the most confusing part of this whole thing is knowing what components to buy. And so I'm going to post a link to every single thing that I use in the comment section below this video. And so what I've done here is I'm picking the components that you're going to be able to find the most information online about. So these are going to be very commonly used alarm system components, things that everybody's been using for 20 years or so. And that's going to make this process very, very easy for you. And it's also going to make for a very reliable alarm system.
The first step in installing your alarm system is locating where the control panel is going to be in your house. You're looking for something centrally located. That way you can minimize the length of wires that you're going to be running. You also want it out of the way, so that's normally going to mean a closet somewhere in the house or perhaps the basement. It may be tempting to put it in an attic location, but I don't recommend that because the extreme temperatures of attics are going to reduce the life expectancy of your backup batteries. I'm going to locate my panel right here on this wall, and the first step is going to be going ahead and drilling so that I can get all the wires to come through the floor and up to that panel. Every single wire is going to come back to this control panel. So I'm boring a pretty big hole right here due to that fact. Any alarm component that requires a power supply is going to need 4-wire cable. And so I'm going to go ahead and start running my 4-wire cable first. That's going to be things like the control panel, in my case the Siren, because I've actually got a powered outdoor Siren. It's going to be glass breakage detectors, motion detectors, anything that requires power to operate. Things that don't require power to operate are your window and door sensors and anything that's like a reed switch. So I'm just going to start fishing wires. I'm going to start with my keypad, and I'm going to take wires down to the keypad location in this house. Every time you run a cable, you need to label it. I just put a little bit of tape around each one. As you're running all your cables, you pretty much have freedom to do what you want except for a couple of things. One of those is you want to make sure that all of your cables stay away from any high voltage cables. So anything that your electrician put in, you want to stay away from those because they can cause interference. Now with that said, it's going to be impossible to stay completely away from it. So whenever you need to, go against some of the high voltage, it's best if you cross it like this rather than running parallel with it like that. The other thing to keep in mind with the electrical wires that you may come across is the more amperage it is carrying, the worse the interference is going to be. So like that is a main line right up there, that gray one. That's one you want to stay as far away from as possible. On the other hand, your white wires tend to just be 15 amp wires and they're not carrying nearly as much load. Now with me mentioning that I ran home runs to every sensor in this house, that can use up a whole lot of wire. And one solution to not using so much wire is this. It's a wired zone expander. And what this does is you can essentially mount this box remotely somewhere else in your house. If you happen to have, let's say like your basement, for example, is pretty far from your panel. If you wanted to put everything that's on your basement into this box, you can mount this remotely. You'll take your 4-wire, just as if you're running like a keypad, and you'll just only have to run that from your panel to this box. Then you mount this remotely, and then you have a shorter run for all of your other home runs to this unit. And that's one option. Now, in my case, I decided not to do that, but instead I do still need more wired zones for my system. So I'm going to be putting this box inside my panel, and that way I can expand my zones, and we'll get more into that later. But I wanted to go ahead and mention that right now before you get started on your wiring, because if you did have a section of your house that's pretty far away and you didn't want to waste all that wire doing home runs, this is a good solution to allow you to basically save wire. Next, I'm running my outdoor siren, which I'm actually going to put up in the attic. So I'll stick a wire up through there and where I want to locate that siren in the attic. And then I'm going to take 4-wire to the glass breakage detectors and motion detector. And then after that, we'll switch to 2-wire and start running it to every window and door that's going to have a reed switch on it. I'm not going to show you all that because I like to keep my videos quick and easy. But I will show you details from each step that might be confusing or different than what we've already done. It is a different day than when I began, and I have just finished running all of my wires. I finally got them all done. I want to say, it's been a while since I counted, but I think I have around 20 termination points in this system. And I used 1,500 feet of wire almost exactly. So just to give you sort of a baseline of how much wire you might need. It's time to start installing these window and door sensors. And we're going to start with a window, and I'll show you that. I've used these before in the past and had good luck with them. But if you notice, they are made in China. And so that always makes me a little bit nervous, and I think it's a best practice always just to go ahead and test them before installing them. That way you just save yourself some headaches later. So to test them, I've got a multimeter right here, and I'm going to set it to continuity, and let's see, I'm going to turn on the bell so that anytime I have continuity, I get a beep. So these are normally closed switches, which means that you have continuity when the window is closed. And so I've now got both my leads hooked up to this new switch. And as you'll notice, I have no continuity right now. So let's act like we're closing the window. And we have continuity. So that's telling me that this switch is working and functioning fine and I can install it. And I'm going to do that every time just to save myself from having any headaches later. Make sure every single one of these works before installing it. I should also mention that I'm using recessed switches today, and I'm using these because they're hidden and they just look nicer in a house. There will be on my basement windows. I'm going to use some that aren't recessed, and so I'll show you that process as well. It's basically the same, and I'm using those down there because there's not good access in my basement to get underneath the windows to hook all my wires up. With knowing where to drill on your window, the best thing I can tell you is to look at the top and bottom sill of your window. Normally the bottoms are perfectly flat, so it doesn't really matter so much. But the top, there's different designs. Like this one here has this groove down the middle of it. And so in my case, I'm going to drill right through the center of that. Let me show you a different window that I've already done. And this one, same house, different window style. And this has just a center groove there. It's much deeper. Again, what I did when I installed this one is I went right for the center of that. That way I know I'm right in the center of this window. The only thing you have to watch about doing that is making sure you don't go too deep. Whatever you do, you do not want to drill so deep that you break the seal of the window and let the gas out of it. And so you only want to just kind of, there be one piece of vinyl that you go through first and then another piece of vinyl just a little bit farther, and that should do it as far as drilling into it. So my alarm wire is right here, and I'm going to drill the top of this first, and that same thing. So like I said earlier, I'm getting right there in the center. Went through the first piece of vinyl. I know I need to go farther than that. There should be one more thing that I can drill through. All right, now I'm through both. I don't want to go a whole lot deeper than that. With that drilled, I'm going to take a Sharpie. I'm going to stick the end of this Sharpie right up there in my new hole. I'm going to bring the window down, keeping that Sharpie perfectly straight. Make myself a nice little dot. Now I know where I need to drill on the bottom. So I got myself a nice little dot right there, and I'm going to drill all the way down and through the wood that's below this now. Take the magnet, get this pushed up in there. Now it's nice to nail the way in there. Pull these through. Get that down in the hole nice and flush. You want that tight so that it doesn't pop back up. Mine is. Let's test it. Make sure that they line up. The way to do that is the same way we tested this earlier. So I'm going to go ahead, set my multimeter to read continuity. Both these hooked up now. Change this to continuity with a beep. When I close this window, we should hear a tone. And we do. And now we will open it. And the tone is gone. So this is functioning correctly. And I'll keep doing that little test and as I drill and set every single window. Because when a door closes, it kind of squishes this here just a little bit. I know that if I go right next to this padding, I tend to be in a pretty good position on the door. So I'm going to just pick a spot wherever I want to put this and drill. I don't really have a fancy way for figuring out where to drill on your door besides using a measuring tape. And what I'll end up doing is just measuring how far over this is from where the door shuts. And then I don't know where to drill my hole. But I've got myself a spot marked right there, so let's drill it. The important thing is just that you're as straight as possible. I'm going to take a magnet, put it right here, get it started in the door. The nice thing about doing doors is you can kind of force it. So I'm just going to take a hammer, I'm just going to lightly tap that all the way in the door, nice and flush. One trick helps you feed these wires better is to twist them around each other so they're a little more substantial. That pushes right into place. And then just like we test the windows, I will test this and make sure that when it closes, everything lines up and is functioning properly. Once I have all my sensors installed, then it's time to start actually wiring them up. Now there are a bunch of different ways to connect your wires. You could use wire nuts, you could twist them together and then use electrical tape. You can also buy special connectors that are built actually for security systems, and I'll put a link to how you can buy those in the video description. But the way I'm going to do it today is using a soldering iron, and I just like soldered connections, and that's why I tend to go with that route. It only takes a little bit longer, and when I'm done I know I have something that's secure and it's going to last for years and years. So let's show you how to do this. We need to go ahead and strip these back, and I should go ahead and just tell you that it does not matter which side is which on these switches. So each one of these, all it does is create a loop in your circuit, and a current passes through it and it can go in either direction. Now this one that I've got here that I'm starting with has 2 wires, cable coming to it. If you happen to have 4-wire cable, you can still use it. You will only use 2 of the wires. And what's important as far as the colors go is just that you stay consistent throughout your whole system. Your 4-wire should probably have red, black, green, and white wires. It doesn't really matter how you do it. Maybe since 2-wire is red and black, those would be the best wires to use on your 4-wire for wiring your sensors regarding those. Whatever colors you choose, it doesn't really matter so long as you are consistent. Now that I've got these all nice and bent, we need to take some heat shrink tubing and slide it over our 2 wires. It's real important that you remember to keep these separate. I know I've made the mistake before in the past just working real quickly where instead of putting 2 things of heat shrink on here, I did just 1 on this side, and then all that would do is end up making you always have a continuous circuit, because as your wires would touch, they would basically negate the purpose of having a switch. And so that's just one of those dumb mistakes that can be made when you're rushing. So now to attach these, hopefully you can see it on that camera there. All I do is I make an X and then start twisting these together. Got those twisted together nice. Grabbing my soldering paste. Gonna get some solder on here and here. Doesn't really matter if you use too much. And now I simply solder this together. Let's go ahead and prime that And I have real nice soldered joints. Those aren't going to come apart on me. So let's shrink that tubing over it and heat it up. And this one's all wired up. I'm going to keep doing that for every door and window sensor that I have. You'll notice that your panel comes with a bunch of these little resistors. And what these are is sort of like tamper and damage protection. These are end-of-line resistors, which means that they go at the very last sensor in your zone. Now, in my case, I'm not real worried about tampering with this alarm system. I'm not real concerned about damage, and I'm going to choose to wire my system without end-of-line resistors. But that's only because I plan on owning this house for the next the rest of my life, essentially. And in the event that 20 years from now, I need to change my alarm panel, I'd rather not have to go around to every sensor and pull them out and change resistors if I buy an alarm panel that uses a different type of resistor. But in your case, you may want to use these, and particularly if you are worried about the possibility of somebody that's smart enough to tamper with your alarm system and cut wires and things like that. So I wanted to go ahead and let you know how to install these. Now, you don't want to install these inside your panel. If you do there, they basically defeats the purpose. I mean, you can do it, but it won't provide the protection that's necessary. Instead, what you do is you figure out what zones your house is going to have, and then you figure out what's going to be the last sensor on that zone. So let's pretend that this window right here behind me is the last sensor on its zone. What I would do is, instead of making my connection where both of my incoming wires go to both of my sensor wires, I would instead insert this resistor on one side right there. And so it would be just like I was wiring it before, except I would have a resistor between two wires. And it's probably a good idea to always put those resistors on the same color for each one that you wire. In the basement, I needed to use external alarm sensors. And these are absolutely simple to wire up. You just stick the appropriate wires right in there and screw it down. And this is what it'll look like when you're finished. Now I'm up here in the attic now, and I'm getting ready to put in my Siren. Now, there are many options for Sirens, and you may very well choose a different one than what I've chosen. You'll notice that this has 3 wires coming out of it, but I'll only be using 2. And what it does is the red wire gives you a warble sound, while the yellow wire gives you a constant, steady tone. And that just gives you options for your alarm system. In my case, I'm going to go with a warble. So I'll be connecting the red positive power to my power, which is going to be incidentally red as well inside my cable. And then I'll be connecting this white as my negative. Easy peasy. I am now at the control panel. It's time to start wiring this whole thing up. The first thing I want to do is go ahead and grab my zone expander. Since I am using mine inside this panel, I'm going to mount it inside there rather than have this remotely mounted somewhere else in the house. You may not have one of these. If you have 8 zones or less, you don't need one. And there's also a thing called zone doubling, which would allow you to have up to 16 zones without using one of these. Now, I'm only going to have about 14 zones, but I prefer to have one of these rather than do zone doubling. And so these aren't very expensive, and I think it was worth buying. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this in the box. I just have 2 self-tapping screws right here that I put in, and then this will slide right down and over them. In the manual is this handy little sheet that tells you how to wire your system. So we're going to work our way sort of from left to right, and the first thing I need to do is put the AC power in, which goes on slots 1 and 2. Now, most of the wires that we've been using for our alarm system is 22 gauge, and that's not really a thick enough wire for your AC power supply. I'd recommend anything 18 gauge or bigger. The thermostat wires that I've used elsewhere in this house for air conditioning happens to be 18 gauge. So I just went ahead and grabbed one of those, cut off the wires I didn't need, and we're going to run this into slots 1 and 2. Now the polarity does not matter because this is AC voltage, so it doesn't matter which wire you put in which slot. And I also wanted to mention, in case you wanted to do the same thing, I recessed my box into the wall just enough that I can open and close the door to it still once the sheetrock is on. Now, what that's going to allow me to do is have all my wires into the wall and this thing not stick out so bad in this little room here. Now, I am going to go ahead and run this AC power supply wire inside my wall down to my receptacle that I have right here, and then I'm just going to stub out this end out of the wall and put my transformer on it, and it'll be able to just plug in right here without a whole bunch of wires running down the wall. And just a little bit cleaner look. Slot number 3 and 4 is going to be our Siren. It looks like the positive side goes to 3 and the ground goes to number 4. So, if you remember, I used red for positive and black for ground, and so I'm going to go ahead and connect those right there. So with spots 4, 5, 6, and 7, you'll happen to notice that these little wires show a whole bunch of devices that can go to them, and we'll have a whole lot of different wires going to those 4 spots in our system. Now, for certain, you're going to have your keypad going there, and that'll be the first thing I probably wire next. In my case, I'm also going to have that expander module wired into those 4 spots as well. Now, if you plan on having wireless, any wireless sensors, that RF receiver would get wired to those 4 spots. Communication devices, touch screens, extra keypads, anything like that is going to get wired into here. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to start by grabbing my keypad wire, stripping this down, and getting those 4 wires in there. And you have a lot of wires going to the same spot on the keyboard, like for example spot 4, I'm going to have 3 black wires going into there. 1 is going to be from the keypad, 1 is from the Siren, and 1 is going to be from this expander module right here. And so what I'm going to want to do is twist all of those wires together and then feed them up in there. That way you can make sure that you don't have any loose wires. So what I'm getting ready to do now, if you happen to notice, I haven't put the keypad wires in yet, and that's because I want to twist all my wires together. So I'm going to go ahead and wire my expander module, and I just took a short length of wire here, and I'm just going to put these in here in their correct spots, and then also up there with these other wires. So we got green, black, red, yellow, or in my case white on the expander right there, and then I've got these wires all twisted together up here at the top, and I'm going to start putting them in their correct spots. Now we are finally ready to start wiring zones and contacts and all that fun stuff. So our first zone, zone number 1, is where your 2-wire smoke detectors go. In my case, I'm not wiring in any 2-wire smoke detectors, but if you are, that's where they're going to go. Now, one thing to note on zone 1, you can use it for other items, but whatever goes there needs to use an end-of-line resistor no matter what. So if I was to go ahead and need to use that zone for, let's say, my front door, I would need to go ahead and make sure that I do have an end-of-line resistor on there. Now, I'm skipping this zone because I don't have 2-wire smoke detectors and I didn't use end-of-line resistors throughout my house. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to zone 2, and you'll see on zone 2 you have a low side and a high side. The high side is where your normal wire goes in, and the low side is whichever wire you put your last end of line resistor would go onto there. In my case, it won't really matter which direction I put things because I'm not using end of line resistors. Moving on over here. Got my wire. I'm just gonna feed it in to this zone and move on. And I'm gonna keep doing that right down the line for every zone that I have in my house. And I'm also going to write down where I put each thing so that later I can use that to program the system. Now, a lot of my zones only have one sensor on it, so I'm going to go ahead and start wiring these up. As soon as I get to a zone that has multiple sensors on it, I'll get right back to you. Okay, I'm getting ready to set up a zone that has multiple sensors on it. In fact, this one has 3 sensors on it. These are 3 windows. Okay, and what I'm going to need to know is which window. If I'm using resistors, I need to know which window is the end of the zone and which one has the resistor on it. So in my case, it doesn't matter. None of them have a resistor on it. But let's pretend that the one with the resistor on it is this black right over here. Okay? And so what I need to do is figure out where my zone is going to start. So let's say it starts right here on this white. So this white will be what gets wired into my zone in right there. So that's the in. So with this one being wired into there, I'll now take these 2 blacks, so go into my next wire, and I'll wire these together and twist them, and I can wire nut them, or I can use pinch clips, or I can solder them. It doesn't matter, just as long as they're connected and that they're not touching anything else. Once these are wired together, then I'll go to my next wire and I will wire these together. So I'm creating a daisy chain, and the last wire remaining is the one with the resistor on it. And then this one with the resistor on it will go to the out terminal in my zones. This is a glass break sensor, but this is going to wire the same as also a motion detector, and this is the first one that I've come to. Now, if I was wiring it to the regular control board, what I would do is this red and green wire that you see here, these would go to your 12 volt power. And so it would be right over here. We would have my blacks all together there and my reds all together there. And then that would provide power for it. And then now, with the other 2 remaining wires, whichever one would have the resistor on it would be wired to the low side, and the one without the resistor would be on the high side of whatever zone I wanted to put it in. Now in my case, I've already got these wired up there, and I'm instead working down here on the expansion module. So what I'm about to do, I will put my power over here. So I'll wire my red to positive and my black to 12 volt ground. And then I'll wire up my zones the way I normally would right down here. Okay, finished wiring this up. Everything that needs power that I had in this expansion panel ends up getting its power right here on the board, which then in turn gets its power from up here on the board. There is something I wanted to mention about these zone expanders. There's actually been 3 different versions of these released, and the first 2 versions require that every single zone has a resistor on it. Now in 2014 they came out with a modern update, and that one does not require resistors in every zone, and instead you can use switch number 7 up here. If you flip that to the, I want to say it's the off position, but don't hold me to that. If you flip it to the off position, I believe, you'll have to read your manual, but which one of the positions will allow you to go to a normally closed zone system down here. And I happened to order my expander from a well-known alarm website, and I should have ordered it from Amazon probably, because the alarm website, sales website, ended up sending me an old stock model for the price basically of the newest kind, and I got one that's a 2010 model here that ended up requiring resistors when I wasn't planning on using resistors in the system. And so I didn't have resistors wired into any of my windows or doors that were going to be on this expander. But that didn't really matter, and I just did a little cheat and ended up putting resistors right here on all the zones inside this box. And so these resistors don't provide me any type of protection being located right here on the panel, but they got the job done, so it'll work. I know I briefly mentioned dip switches a moment ago, and I can't quite remember what the differences are between the newest model and the model I have here. But it is important to look at the manual and figure out exactly how these dip switches should be arranged for your system. In my case, on is down, off is up, and so I have everything in the off position, which is up, except for dip switch 5, 6, and 7. And you know, when I'm saying up and down, that's going to change based on how it's oriented in yours. Mine is actually oriented somewhat upside down. So ignore up and down, but it's number 5, 6, and 7 is what I have on for my system according to my manual. The house is finally all finished, and it's time to start finalizing things. We're going to hook up the keypad first. This is pretty easy to do. You'll notice it actually says on the back of the keypad what should be what, and it's positive, negative, green wire, and yellow wire. Now, I didn't have yellow wire, so white is my yellow, but I'm just going to go ahead and plug these in and tighten them up. It's all wired up. We just got to put it back on here. Snaps into place. Wiring a glass break detector is going to be the same as a motion detector. You're going to have 4 spots and 4 wires. 2 spots are going to be marked for 12 volt. Red is your positive, black is your negative. So we're going to insert them and get them screwed down in their right locations. Then after I do those, you're going to have either a green and yellow wire or a green and white wire. And that's for going to go to the NC and C spot, which is for normally closed and common. Now, I'm going to put the white, which would also be the same as your yellow, to the normally closed spot, and then I'll put the green to the common wire. Where I'm at now, this is the thermostat wire that I ran to power the alarm system. And so we need to go ahead and hook this transformer to it and get it plugged in. Now this thermostat wire had a bunch of different wires, and of course I had used this because it's a thicker gauge than the other stuff. But if I remember correctly, red and black should be the ones that I need. I use those for power in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut off the rest of these because they don't mean anything. They're not hooked to anything at all. With those hooked, unhooked, I am going to hook these up right here to these. Now it does not matter which color goes where because this is AC power, so it's alternating. But we're just going to get those hooked up in there and tightened on. Time to plug this in and get it screwed on. Oops, don't want the cover. This actually has a screw that gets put into that cover. And the nice thing about the way I happen to put this alarm system where I have a pegboard wall is I can kind of hide this cord inside the wall very easily. I need to get this thing out of our way. So I feed that in. Get that on there. And this should all line up just right. Now it's time to program the system. As you can see, with the power on, it's hard to even notice that it's on this keypad right now, and that's because we need to address the system. What that means is we need to tell this keypad how to communicate with the alarm panel. To do that, we need to hold 3 and 1 down. And you can see it's talking about connection address, and you'll want to enter 16. That's going to be the address for that alarm panel. Once that's entered, you hit star, and there we go. We have it on right now. So we have a trouble code already going off, and we're going to need to get in there and fix that. So it's showing right now that we have faults on all of our systems, and that's because this has not been programmed yet. There are a lot of ways to program one of these alarm systems. In fact, they can get very complicated. They're made for commercial buildings, anything from a jewelry store down to a simple little house like this. If I don't cover what you need in this video, I'd suggest just going ahead and going to Google and searching for programming a Vista 20p alarm system. The other thing you can do, everything I'm going through is actually right here in your manual that'll come with it. And so feel free to just kind of read along and make the decisions for yourself on how to do it. All right, we need to go ahead and enter the programming mode. And to do that, I'm going to hit 4 1 1 2 8 0 0. Now that is the programming code for all systems when they're new from the factory. I want to go ahead and start with zone programming right now, I believe. We'll just go ahead and dive right in. So I'm going to hit star, and then the field is 5 6. When it says set to confirm, it's asking whether or not this is a hardwired, or actually it's asking whether or not this is an RF remote sensor. And of course this is a hardwired system, so the answer would be no. That's 0, so I just go ahead and move forward by hitting the star button. Then it says enter zone number, and we're going to start with zone 1, and so hitting star again. All right, that's showing us what it is currently programmed as from the factory. Zone 1 is listed as number 9, which is fire. P stands for partitions, and really the rest of this isn't going to matter too much for us. So this needs to be a front door, and in the manual, let's see, right here, this is going to be as entry exit number 1, which means it needs to be zone type 1. Entry exit, that's correct. Partition is 1, we didn't use partitions. Report code, I'm actually going to change the report code to 00. This system's not going to be reporting to anywhere. Response time stays the same. Alright, zone 2, we're going to go ahead and change it. So zone 2 is basement, bedroom, windows. And so up here, that would be a perimeter zone. And so I'm going to say that's number 3. Now on this one, it asks whether or not it's an end of line resistor. Now zone 1 has to be an end of line resistor, but zones 2 through 8 did not have to be. As I talked about earlier, I chose to just do normally closed on this. And so according to my manual, end of line resistor would be listed as a 0, but normally closed is going to be number 1. And so I need to change this to number 1. Normally closed. You may very well have kept yours as end of line resistor. Response time stays the same. I'm going to keep going through and doing this just like that. So I'm on zone 3 now. This is our back patio door, and it's not going to be a perimeter. It's actually going to be listed as an entry exit number 2. So 02. 1 partition. No report codes. And this is also normally closed. And I'm just going to keep going through here doing that like that. If you get to a motion detector, that would be listed as zone type 4, which is interior follower, or sometimes people put it as zone 10, which is interior with delay. Like I said earlier, there's a million different ways to program these alarm systems, and this video is just showing how I program mine. But using your manual, if there's anything custom that you need, you should be able to read in your manual and figure it out. For zones 9 through 15, because those are on that expansion board, there's going to be one slight difference in the programming. I'm going to go ahead and program zone 13, which is garage windows. And so, just like normal, I star through. It says zone 13. Shows me what it is. Alright, this is garage windows, which means it's a perimeter zone. So I hit the button, partition. I'm clearing out the report code because I don't need it to report anything. But right here it says RF trans. Now that's because normally a system would use, for zones larger than 9, it would use remote sensors. In this case, we have wired sensors through that extra board. So we're going to actually hit 2 here, which is auxiliary wire, and change it to that. So you'll need to do that for all of your additional zones if you use one of those expansion boards. Anytime you see this program alpha, what it's trying to ask you to do is whether you want to actually type in what each zone is called, and we don't want to do that right now. It's actually more difficult to do it here. For programming a glass break protector, I'm going to go ahead and enter the zone type as perimeter. That's your biggest difference between programming and installing a glass break protector and a motion detector. Anytime you want to exit programming, you're just going to hit *99. And that exits you out of the programming. Because this is already a very, very long video, and I'm going to try to keep things simple, and I'm just going to show you how I programmed mine, which is the basics for a lot of houses. So the first thing I need to do is enter programming mode, and I'll hit 112.800, and then that brings that up. So I want to go ahead and change this installer code, and that's field 20. And so I'm going to change this code for now to 4, 3, 2, 1. And that beep shows that I've now got a new code. The next thing it's going to ask is for quick arm enable. I think most people are going to want their quick arm enabled. I changed that to 1 and then 0. Now and what that is, it just allows you to be able to, hit #2 to leave rather than having to put in your code every time. So for field 22, it's RF jam. We do not want that. So we've hit 0 for that. Next is quick force bypass. I'm going to hit 1 and then 0. And just so you know, the first number is for partition 1. That's the only partition that this alarm system's using. I did not do anything on partition 2. Partitions are sort of, if you're going to have this alarm system work for like different buildings and things like that. But so it's just the first number that really matters on this. Now for RF house code ID, I'm just gonna hit all zeros. And then chime by zone, we're also going to just hit zeros. We don't need anything special. And like I said, we are setting this up as a very simple alarm system. X10 is house code. We're not doing anything there. We are going to field 27. Oh, sorry, we were on field. So for field 27, I'm just hitting 0. Let's see, access code for phone module. That's also just going to be 2 zeros. Single alarm sounding per zone, hitting 0. Fire alarm sounder timeout, 0. Alarm sounder bell timeout. This is where you get to choose how long your alarm is going to sound before it turns off, and that's completely up to you. Standard is about 8 minutes, and so I'm going to go ahead and go with the standard for now. Exit delay, again, this is one that you get to choose, and so I am going with another standard, which is 60 seconds. And that's for partition 1, and then for partition 2, there is none, so I hit 2 zeros. Entry delay, standard is 30 seconds. And then 2 zeros. Entry delay 2, this would be if you had it at another door. I'm just skipping that zone. We'll go to 37. Exit, warning, 0, 0. Confirmation of arming ding. This would actually be like a confirmation ding that goes through your big alarm sound system. And so this isn't something most people want, including me. Let's see. Next, power up, previous state. This should automatically be there. You definitely want this. So you definitely want it in the previous state, so that's 1. In fact, most jurisdictions require that one is set to 1. I'm going to go ahead, and we don't want any of these phone numbers in my system. Now you might end up doing that, but I live so far out that we don't even have phone lines here. So if I did anything, I'd have to have a cellular system, but I don't even have that. So I'm skipping these things. Like I said, you can either use your manual or perform a Google search to figure out how to program those things. Now I need to go ahead and set up a user code to use to disarm the system, because the installer code does not do that. So if you remember, my installer code that I entered was 4321. This time I'm going to hit 8 and then 02. And now I'm going to enter my new master code, and I'm just going to put it as 3322 right now. And that beep shows that I now have a master code. So if I hit 3322 off, it would turn my system off. To set the date and time, you're going to go ahead and enter your master code, and then you hit #63. That enters date and time mode.
And at this point, you should have a fully functioning alarm system. Congratulations, and thank you for sticking with me through all of this. If you're wondering what the house looks like I've been working in, here it is, all finished. I should mention there are some additional things you may still want to program on your alarm, like setting the alpha characters to each zone so your alarm displays faults at, for example, bedroom windows instead of saying zone 10. But that's more of a convenience than a necessity. You can look up how to do that in your manual or search for a video here on YouTube. This was a very long video, and it took me a lot of time to both film and edit it. So if you found it helpful, would you mind helping me by clicking that little subscribe button? Whether you watch more of my videos or not, just having you hit subscribe helps grow my channel and helps me get closer to my goal of doing this full time. I appreciate you.